Hello, my name is Clara Maveglia and I set up the Cultural Entrepreneurship Institute Berlin. Today we are in Munich and soon we will meet our guest Ulrike Flemming. Welcome to our community, Mrs. Flemming. Frau Flemming, schön, dass Sie da sind.
Miss Flemming, lovely to see you.
Sie sich vorstellen?
Would you like to introduce yourself? Yes, I'm Ulrike Flemming. I am a violinist, a music teacher. I teach musical instruments above all. And I've spent my whole life with music. Even as a little girl, when I was 8 years old, I discovered the violin. And the violin has set its stamp on my whole life. I've experienced a great deal, travelled a lot. I've played myself in a number of different formations, at concerts. As a young person, I took part in competitions. But now I have the feeling that all of this served what is now so close to my heart. And that is building up this project for children and young people. It's a social musical project in Argentina in the middle of the Pampa. And that's why you founded Niños en Armonía. Yes, yes. Would you like to tell us about that? Niños en Armonía. What it is? Yes, of course. This matter so close to my heart. Yes. It was 10 years ago that I don't know how to say it, it came to pass. It found me. There was a meeting with the children in the middle of the Pampa, in a no man's land, there among the grass. And there was a moment of encounter with the children, seeing how very like our children they are, our children in the first world. And there was the great fortune that we had a Catholic nun with us who introduced the children to me and said, Ulrike, these children are no different from your children in the first world. If only they could learn music, you will see so much change. And that was, if you like, my initiation. That thought never let go of me. And within a very short space of time, a beginning had taken shape, and for me, it was an insight into the future. And this great electric current filled me and made it clear to me, Ulrike, if you don't do this now, here, probably nobody will. So off you go. Well, that's enthralling. But it would be very interesting to hear how these reactions happen, because of course one often hears such experiences as interesting. But this response of yours to actually get going and build something new, what gave you that idea? Yes, of course. Before that meeting, there had been a very important encounter, in fact several encounters. I went with my former husband, who's a Spanish conductor. Prior to that day, prior to that moment, I spent at least 10 years in Venezuela. I'd been invited by El Sistema. At the time, we didn't really know what that was, and we weren't told a great deal in Venezuela about what kind of children or musicians these were. It just struck us that wherever we went, there were an awful lot of young musicians. And we thought it must be a movement, and they're all very enthusiastic about classical music, and there are symphony orchestras even in small towns, and every evening they get together to play classical music, to practice symphonies. It was only as time passed that it became clear to us that it was more a social movement than a musically inspired movement. José Antonio Abreu had conceived it that way. He himself had experienced the force and power of music and how it can transform people. So I saw there, at the time, there were 250,000 young people all doing their thing all over the country. And the very best teachers they could bring in from abroad. All the lessons were recorded on camera, and in every available minute the children from those towns had rehearsals. They studied these films of their rehearsals, their concerts, constant input of music. And interestingly, at one of our very first trips, I got to know Gustavo Dudamel, who is now world famous. He was playing among the second violins in the orchestra, and my job was to practice the violin with these young musicians. So we met in a violin lesson. It was absolutely clear that with all those young musicians, there were bound to be a lot of latent talents. And I'm talking of a period about 30 years ago, when these talents, like Gustavo's, entered the musical stage and showed us how we in the first world, the old world, have a feeling that there's so much we can learn now from them. So that was the foundation for the meeting I had, and probably I would not have had the courage out there in the middle of the Pampa to start a project like that if I hadn't had that experience, if I hadn't seen what is possible beforehand. Although I have to say, Argentina, like every Latin American country, any country indeed, has completely different circumstances, structures, compared with Venezuela. And even retrospectively, I have to say that I was probably very courageous and reckless to start something and see what happens. But it would be good to know what influenced you personally. How did you become the person you are? Well, of course, I could go back a very long way, but we don't really have the time for that. But I can no doubt say that I myself come from a very simple background. I experienced as a small child, and this was a seminal influence, the fact that my parents both came from Germany's former Eastern territories, and at the end of the Second World War they had to flee, they had to start all over again. So from that point of view, home wasn't something I found in my family or environment. I was always looking outside, looking for my true home. And if you go deep down as a human being, I always had a feeling that home was somewhere else. Home was deep down inside somewhere. As a child and as a teenager, I found home in music, practicing and playing music, because I found this deep abundance, not only emotional, but something underlying that, something behind the emotions that are created when you play music, something even deeper, even deeper. And through meetings I had, I was very fortunate in that among certain musical quarters I was able to meet some very well-known, unique people. Sergiu Celibidache, the Romanian conductor, for whom music was more. It was always more than notes. Music, if it arises, because one of the famous things that he says is, he said, there is no such thing as Beethoven's Fifth. It either arises or it doesn't. There isn't just music, some kind of sound, and something is moved by it. It calls for more factors. There is more connection, and the conditions that we have as musicians, and indeed those who are listening, those deep, those very deep, profound connections inform our human lives, exploring who am I, what is in me, and what is just facade. These encounters, this hard work with him, which certainly leads us into spheres of Zen, the very ultimate questions we can ask ourselves existentially. I don't say we have to, but some people do ask these questions, some sense these questions as existential, and others don't. We don't know when these questions are going to hit us. No doubt at the very latest, as we approach death. Exploring that is something that has very much influenced me until the present day. And at that moment, when I met those children in the Pampa, there was something for me that was very profound, because I glimpsed what I had been given and what I can give. And the foundation for my work with the children is, of course, to begin with, that you devote attention to the children, not only ensuring that they have a hot meal and a little bit more education, but at the moment where I ensure that they can hold an instrument in their hands, I am giving them an opportunity to take that path which may well lead deep down inside them, but without requiring anything of them, simply giving them that opportunity. Why? Because the children who live in such austerity, above all intellectual poverty, without many prospects for their lives, if you leave them where they are, the same thing will happen to them as is happening all around them. Hardship, nothing to eat, no employment prospects, and simply a vegetation. At the most, often they don't have anything to eat, but they do have a television, and they are completely cut off from reality. They witness realities that have nothing to do with their own reality, and then they start to develop desires, appetites, as we do, as we all develop appetites, that are completely excessive. And then the road to prostitution, the road to crime, the road to drugs is a very quick one, but not the attempt to discover what skills I have inside me. I'm intelligent. In the project, people feel it's very hard to learn instruments, string instruments. In the first world, if you play the violin, the viola, the cello, these are going to be children and teenagers who've been to grammar school and studied. It's very unusual to find successful string players with a very simple basic education. With wind instruments it's rather different, and with singing as well, but the string instruments always signal a high level of intelligence because you can't learn it any other way. And so the children are able, by practicing, to discover what they can do, and suddenly going to school or thinking, actually I'd quite like to study at university, there's more in me than I realized. That is a level which moves them on. So they concentrate not just on those simple appetites, but they can say, I can do something different. And then there's an organization, there are people here who want to help me to do this other thing. That's wonderful. But if you could, what would you do better? Better? There's a great deal one could do better. But I have to say that to me and to us, because I'm not on my own out there, I have the good fortune that locally I've been able to work with the institution of those Catholic nuns who themselves had for years been looking for something that would attract those children. They'd been working with catechism and trying to relieve some of the hardship, and had got to know the families, and they were looking for something or somebody who could help them to give more to those children. So that out there, locally, we have two pillars. On the one hand, this institution, the Catholic nuns call themselves servidoras. There is a place, there is a house which is an old estancia, which is now rather dilapidated. It's very simple, but there is a place, and the servidoras are the carers. They look after the day-to-day matters and take care of the children. And I, with my association, which I set up here in Germany, I make sure that there are adequate financial resources, that we have instruments. 3 times a year I visit, and I above all teach the teachers who are local. And the third pillar, which is fantastic because this simply happened, are the young German volunteers. These are young Germans who play music, who come from Germany, spend a period volunteering, doing social work out there, and do everything that's required. Teaching the children, or rather practicing with the children, inspiring the Argentinian teachers, because their training in Argentina is not at all of the same level, or doesn't have the same wealth of material that we've been able to develop in our own country. So those are 3 pillars. And it was always important to me from the outset that we don't simply turn up and impose a system on them, but that we let it grow. Always looking wisely, sometimes not always wisely, but building our own experience so that we're growing together every day. Looking at what happens and what we can do. The aim being always to ensure that the children, the families, the teachers, the servidoras accomplish this gradual process together, so that something grows. And I see my task as being more observing, always retaining the vision I have based on my experience and identifying small steps. For example, I haven't really studied other projects, but my feeling, my experience, my little in-depth sense says, Ulrike, create the conditions to enable something to emerge. I could give you a little example, but I think it's probably, I think I've got the message across. You said in an interview that you want to make sure that those children receive a training, not only learn to play an instrument, but can do something to improve their income prospects. How can we help? Yes, within the 10 years this has arisen because the first generation of children that came to us, a lot of them started quite late at 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 years old. And now, 10 years on, we have, through the musical work, achieved a situation whereby all the children have completed their education at school and not just spent a few years at school and then dropped out. And all of them have done not only basic education, but have moved on and taken exams that would enable them to enter university. And then we can see quite simply there are 2 or 3 girls. This is, I suppose, the third generation, if I could call it that, who are incredibly gifted musically and where it's clear to us that they could be professional musicians. And these pupils, they are girls. I hope that very soon we have some boys who show similar skills. At the moment, we are taking them during the summer holidays to Buenos Aires so they can get to know musical life there and meet the best Argentinian teachers we can get hold of to learn from them, so that they can see how things could be in the future. And of course, one day I dream, when they're at least 18, because before they reach the age of majority we can't take them abroad, of course, I dream that one day they can train here with excellent teachers. And perhaps here they will be able to develop a career, but the best thing would be, of course, if they went back to pass on what they have received from us back home to others, at least for a time. But these are visions, and we have to take this step by step and see whether we really can achieve it, whether they have what it takes. Other children that have a simpler structure, we ask them when they've finished school if we can see that they're not going to be professional musicians, even though they'd like to carry on making music, and we'd love them to, and play in orchestras, because they've seen that it gives them so much. And that so much is something I could lecture on. But we want to support them in taking real training so that they don't relapse into that day labourer existence. They've finished school, they're playing an instrument, but in Argentina there isn't really what we have, the guilds, the developed trades and crafts. If someone wants to be a car mechanic, then we want to make sure that we find the best trained car mechanic in the area to teach them everything he knows, and of course that will cost money. And it will take time. Normally, with the youngsters there, they immediately go out to work. One will go to the pizza delivery service. The girls usually clean for hotels without training. We've got one girl who dreams of studying hospitality, but we want her to go to the best college so that she has the best prospects. Why? Because she's incredibly intelligent, because she's full of energy, but there's no family to support her life. She's been abandoned by her mother. The mother is a prostitute. She knows only that she has 10 brothers and sisters. They don't really know. They suspect they have different fathers. And the mother one day upped and left. She left these children in the hut because she discovered a new lover, a new illusion. And this lover said, "I only want you, I don't want the children." The children spent a week or two in their hut, and sooner or later they realized their mother would not be coming back, and the neighbors realized as well. The neighbors tried to share out feeding them, but it was clear after a month that the mother wasn't going to come back. It's not that unusual there. So they reported it to the police. The children were put in homes, different homes, where the children then experienced the worst things, things they had never experienced to date, which they witnessed there. Then they were lucky enough to be placed with foster families, but it was a bittersweet luck because the foster family were religious, they were very strict and they used violence, so the children started running away. I'm telling you that story by way of example. There are children who have no support whatsoever, no family. And when they grow up, they have nothing. And there is nobody who will look after their training and their prospects. And this is a long-term concern I have, apart from the music, that we develop a second mainstay here in Germany to find sponsors who will take on these youngsters and say they will pay for the training for these young people. It would be interesting, of course, to know, because all of this touches our souls and you want continuity, how do you finance this project? Yes, of course, this is the number one problem. I try, using the modest resources available to me, to approach the public, for example, with benefit concerts. Here in the Munich region, word has got round, and there are people who regularly donate money to us. There is a wonderful family who have also experienced that feeling that they have had so much good fortune in their own lives and earned so much money through their work that they feel a great responsibility. They say, we want to share this money. And of course, if you have the financial resources, you have the freedom to decide what you want to do with it. There is so much hardship in the world. There are so many meaningful activities. There are so many organizations, charities. And this family simply decided, for us it's quite clear, that if we really want to achieve something sustainably, we want to start with the children, we need to give them education. And although this family are not musicians, they have been convinced by our idea, my idea, about how you reach the children with music. And they recognize that at once, that music is an ideal tool for offering children education. And from them, we receive wonderful annual donation, although it is by no means enough, because the conditions in Argentina, as people probably know, has been on a downward slope economically, and that has triggered tremendous inflation, prices which rise by the week. And for us too, that means that we need more and more money. We've heard so many interesting things from you, Ms. Flemming. Before we reach a conclusion, what would you like to say to our community, the people who are listening to us or watching you here and who are moved by the picture you're painting of the music and the children? What would you like to tell them? The first thing I would like to tell them is this thought, this idea which originally moved me. Not the idea, what do I still need, what do I lack, but what do I have? What can I do? And what can I give in this life? Because our life is very short. So, what might be the purpose of my existence? And of course, with regard to Niños en Armonía, this movement that I facilitated, I simply would hope that there are people who will support us financially. And then, of course, also, in musical terms, if they have an instrument, an orchestral instrument lying around at home, gathering dust, there are some very moving stories about instruments like that which are now being played by those children in the Pampa, which spent many years as family relics that had belonged to a father or a grandfather, enabling them to survive the war or whatever. And then somebody's heard about the project and said, we want this instrument to sound again, and we want you and your children to sound it in the Pampa. Well, we hope that we have a lot of users who hear that and decide to get rid of their dust. We've almost reached the end, but I have one more question. As you have so much experience and you've talked about your experience, what do you think is the most important thing in life? What's the most important thing in life? What is the purpose of a life? I think I can only speak for what I experience or sense myself. One needs to discover who one is. Who am I? What is it that moves me with every breath I take? With every aspiration I have? What is it? And how can I, first of all, discover it? And secondly, fulfill my humanity through it, and be active, be useful in this community, in this unique, wonderful community that we compose as human beings on this unique, lovely planet that gives us so many opportunities. Thank you for all you've told us and for your time. Thank you very much.